With the news of Houston becoming home for Anglicans and Episcopalians who want to join the Roman Catholic Church, we asked what other moves are churches making to continue to offer hope and fellowship in an ever-changing world of beliefs and mores. We'll explore why people choose to leave the church and why others choose to join in, and how do specific religions shift and adapt to accommodate our changing world. Tonight, we'll discuss the ever-evolving world of the church. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Dr. Jill Carroll, Houston area scholar, writer, and speaker in religious studies. Sal Solo, Catholic youth retreat leader and public speaker. And Father Jeffrey Steenson, Ordinary of the Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter. Before we start, remember you can share your thoughts throughout the show on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. And welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
First of all, Father, I guess the proper term is Father.
Yeah, that will work.
Even though the position of an ordinary is very similar to that of a bishop, correct? Can you explain a little bit about what your new position is?
I'm in charge of something that Pope Benedict created officially for the United States in January 1 this year, which is an entity in the Catholic Church that allows those who have an Anglican or an Episcopalian background, who in conscience want to come into full communion with the Catholic Church, to be able to come together as groups and to keep many of their traditions, their liturgical practices, for instance, and be part of this wide, vast family that is the Catholic Church.
Jill, how is that different than any group wanting to switch to any religion?
Well, I mean, there are similarities and differences. We live in the United States of America where we have a great deal of religious freedom, and there's a great deal of movement. People routinely often now will move from religion to religion or from denomination to denomination within Christianity. But I think this is something quite special, actually, historically, because you've got two of the very large representations of the Christian faith, the historic representations, the Catholic Church, and then the Anglican, which, of course, broke from it. And here you have an opportunity for those who wish to return to the sort of mother church, if you will, to come back, and that's a very special thing.
But couldn't they always? I mean, if you were Episcopalian and you wanted to become a Catholic, you could just become a Catholic.
I think
Why is this unique?
I think you might be in a better position to answer that, but I think it's a extra welcome, and it's an institutional way of saying we're going to make a structure for you to come back in.
Yeah, what the Catholic Church has always welcomed individuals that want to come back, but the idea is that this might be a model that would allow groups of people to be able to come back and not lose their own identity and the culture, the church culture that they had before. It'll be retained. It's a very tricky thing, though. I feel a lot of I understand how challenging this work is, because the Catholic Church wants to welcome people that come to it, but also has a responsibility to respect other church traditions, other ecclesial traditions, and wants to keep her ecumenical relationships going as well. So it's a welcome, but it's also recognizing that we still have to continue to respect the other churches, particularly where we're coming from, the Anglican Church or the Episcopal Church.
I think as a lifelong Catholic, my impression is that there is a difference today, but not only with this Pope, but also the previous Pope, John Paul II, that there seems to be more of a real motivation towards reconciliation, not just with Anglicans, but in general. Obviously, they've tried to reconcile with Jewish people and even other faiths. I think it was very striking at the funeral of John Paul II that every other kind of faith was there represented. He wasn't just the Catholic leader, he was a huge world figure of reconciliation and so on. The part that he played with the solidarity movement, the fall of communism and so on, the role of a pope in the present age, and therefore of the Catholic Church, which he leads, is very, very different to times gone by. They don't stick in the Vatican anymore and kind of, cover their heads, bury their heads in the sand. It seems that really reaching out is what they feel is their role. Just the conference that I'm here for in Houston right now is of Catholic youth ministry people, National Catholic Youth Ministry professionals, and they spoke about when Pope John Paul came to Denver. A few years back, and how it just gave this enormous impetus to the American Catholic Church. I wasn't living in America at that time, but having been living here over 12 years now, I kind of feel somewhat American, and I understand that it's very easy for us being in a church which is governed from Rome to kind of feel a bit like they're ignoring us or they don't understand. They don't understand what we're up against.
But isn't there, and I mean no disrespect to the question and the way I ask it, but isn't this much to do about nothing? The fact is that in today's day and age, fewer and fewer people are going to religion, that the churches are having a harder time of it. What do you find that children, the youth today, their view of religion? Is this something that they're looking to embrace, that they want this feeling of a church, or have we moved as a community more toward spirituality,
Well, the thing is, you don't come to the church for what you can find elsewhere. I used to be a rock star in my youth. And so when I had a real experience of conversion, people thought I was going to be, wanting one of these big mega churches and playing the guitar and that. And I didn't want that at all. When I first came, I was into the very traditional. I first came back to the church and I liked the Latin and so I understand for Anglicans wanting to come into the as you call it, the mother church, with 2,000 years of tradition. Why would you not want that? And as we're talking about Anglicans, and I was reflecting, well, of course, Anglican essentially means English, Church of England, and the Anglican Church was not founded because of any high theological ideas. Simply, the king just simply wanted to get rid of his wife and get a younger woman. And other than that, Henry VIII basically went to his grave believing everything Catholic, everything Roman Catholic.
So then how similar are these traditions? How closely tied are they still today?
Well, there's been real convergence in the language of prayer. For instance, the worship in an Episcopal parish and in a Catholic parish you'd find many similarities between them. And since the Second Vatican Council in the early 1960s, there has been a very high level theological discussion going on between Anglicans and Catholics. It goes under the acronym ARCIC, Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission. And it was astonishing how many points of faith and doctrine there was real, genuine agreement on.
So the logical next question would be that if they're so similar, why make the shift? Why did you personally, because before you were Episcopalian, now you've come over to the Catholic Church before all of this began, why make that change? What are you looking for different?
For me, I was uncomfortable with, in the Episcopal Church, the way the Episcopal Church is governed is essentially a democracy. Clergy and lay people, they come together and they have a conference or a convention and make decisions about faith and doctrine and practice. And I was very uncomfortable with the model of the church being a democracy. I don't think that's the way the church was founded by Jesus Christ, nor the way it developed over the early generations of the church. And so I needed a hierarchical structure for my faith. And because we came from Rome, that was the rock to which we'd come home to. And I think for many Anglicans and many Episcopalians, once you take away all of these emotional questions about leaving and coming and all that, I think if you sit down and have a quiet conversation with the leaders of Anglican churches, they would agree that this is probably the highest ecumenical goal that they have as well, is to reach a point where they can have intercommunion and reconciliation with the Roman Catholic Church again.
I'm going to bet, Jill, that there are a lot of Episcopalians and Anglicans out there that would not agree with this and that feel this is not where we want to go, that this is why we're where we're at.
Well, and that's why we have the Anglican and then we have the Episcopalian, which are not exactly the same. Even within the Anglican tradition, you have division and arguing and differences of view, some of which I think contributes to why some might feel like they're going to be more comfortable in a Roman Catholic tradition or in some other Protestant tradition. So you have coming coming and going all the time. But I think, going back to your question about the youth and what Sal was saying, I really agree with this, because what always draws people to religion or to any deep spiritual tradition is it authentic, and can it give answers that are deeply satisfying to the biggest questions that we have as human beings? Who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we here? How are we supposed to live? What happens when we die? These are the deepest questions that human beings have. And what I love about the world's religions is that they not only put those questions front and center, they answer them in their own ways. And if that's an authentic answer, and if that religious body, whatever it is, gives its best effort and really tries to authentically answer that question, they're going to draw people, whether they're young or they're old.
I like that you use the word authentic. And there was another word that was in my mind when you were speaking, Father, was there's an absolutism about the Catholic Church. And without wanting to get overly political, but you can't help in this moment talking about the healthcare thing, and trying to force the hospitals to birth control. And the Catholic Church is never going to give in on that. It's not negotiable. It doesn't matter to them who's president or what party they are. The Church has been teaching the truth for 2,000 years. So 4 years of a presidency is nothing to them. And they don't care about the particular bill. That's not going to change. That's not going to move.
But that's interesting you bring that up about not changing, not moving. But priests aren't married. But now with this new ordinary, they can be married priests in the church. So the church can make accommodations when they need.
Priests have not always been celibate. That's not an absolute, really.
That's right.
But it has been for a while.
Oh, yeah, a long time.
You've had a good many years.
Those early centuries, there were married bishops and priests.
But so then how do we answer that then? Where are the absolutes in religion, and where are the things that should be finessed to make it, and I hate to use this terminology, but more attractive to the people out there? Because in a way, we are selling religion. Any church.
Might I suggest a different word?
Sure,
and
definitely,
that would be
please.
relevant. Not so much attractive, but to make it
relevant.
is
Okay,
more
make it
relevant.
relevant.
Relevant and responsive to current conditions.
Okay, so
And
I put the question out there.
Well, and I'm going to, if I can, maybe it's a little bit too provocative, but maybe if I could start with this.
We'll throw a chair.
And you just have a go. But one of the things that I so much value about having a pope, as a brand new Catholic, I've only been a Catholic since 2007, so I'm really a baby Catholic.
And we've invited you to represent them all, so here you go.
But what I so much appreciate about it is, here we live in a very diverse culture in the United States, and in my former ecclesial communion in the Episcopal Church, there was an attempt to try to listen to the voice of the culture and the voice of the experience of people today. Where is the Holy Spirit leading them? And what sometimes happens is the church then becomes not enslaved to, but it follows the culture.
It's a mirror of the culture.
It's a mirror of the culture. And what's so effective, I think, about the Catholic Church and the ability for the Pope to speak universally to local situations is that he doesn't live in that culture. He does not bound by the issues that would bind us. And so he can be objective, and he can call us in a prophetic way to ask the hard questions about how do we relate to the culture in which we find ourselves. Are we being faithful to the truth, to what Christ left us, what he gave to the apostles and left to us in Scripture? And to have that objective voice, for me, has been a great, great blessing.
I think that's a very good point. I hadn't really thought about it from that side. I would also add, though, as much as there's a possibility for someone in the position of the Pope to be objective because they're out of the culture, there's also the risk that they can be completely disconnected and out of touch with what is really emerging as the human cry for whatever form of salvation you want to say. And so I think that's something that has to be balanced, and I think it pushes us back to something you and I were saying earlier before we came on the show, is that each religious body has to decide, first of all, who it is and what it believes, and then how it will negotiate its relationship with culture. Will it be a pure reflection of it? Will it be a profit to it to call it out? Will it be hostile to it and reject it and see that it's just wrong all the time? I mean, what will be its relationship to culture? And I think some religious bodies have had a rather consistent relationship over history and time where they've either been flat-out mirrors all the time or always calling it out, but then others have sort of moved and it's been an organic kind of evolution. But it's a question that never goes away. And I think what sometimes you hear people, especially in America, saying, why isn't the Catholic Church being more responsive and they should change and things? And the church, like you said, they've been here 2,000 years. They've survived how many thousands of political regimes and cultures and geographies, and they're not going to change just because suddenly some Pew poll comes out and says Americans want X, Y, Z.
We almost expect the church to be like a reality show, don't we?
Yeah.
Who's the latest star? What's the trendy thing to say right now?
But there are critics of the whole move with what's going on with you and in the church here right now that it's saying, well, they see that there's an opening here in the Episcopalian Church, and hey, we could get some more people into the church. We can bring in some more priests and stuff.
That's a cynical view, though.
But it is out there.
It's
out there. But I mean, remember, for those of us who live in Europe and North America, we are the minority voice now in world Christianity, and I think at the top of the agenda of the Catholic Church today is how to make the faith compelling and to gather in these people from many other parts of the world that constitute the majority now. And so,
but you do have to talk about numbers. You do have to worry.
I'm not so sure I agree with you there, Ron, because you see there's a big difference in concept between a Protestant church and a Catholic church, because a Protestant church does have to attract people to come to that church, especially whatever mega churches you have around Houston and around Texas. They have to attract a congregation. But Catholics, like it or not, we're born into it usually. These guys obviously not.
It's a different form of transmission.
But when you're born, you see the majority of Hispanic Catholics in the United States, they're always going to go to Catholic church, whether they know anything, whether they don't, whether they like it, whether they don't. They're going to do it because it's in their culture. The Polish people, they're going to go to the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is not primarily concerned with recruiting. They don't really think in those terms.
And I know you all walk this walk much more than I do, but I do have to say, from what you read, what you hear, there are fewer people becoming priests. There are fewer parishioners filling the churches. The churches are closing. They can't afford to keep the buildings because they don't have the people. It's got to be concerned for an organization like the Catholic Church to worry, where do our next people come from?
But here's been my experience. I teach at the University of St. Thomas and St. Mary's Seminary here in town, and our student numbers in the seminary are increasing. And the feeder seminary, the Trinity at the University of Dallas, is experiencing great growth as well. And I think Sal, what you've described earlier. Young people find that there's a rock, there's something firm for them to invest their lives in, and we're seeing vocations now such as we haven't seen before.
So are we seeing a coming back to the church, do you think?
In my opinion, yes.
I think you would be surprised, Ern, how proud to be Catholic many young people in America are. Yeah. You see, you could take a thing like the recent pro-life rally in Washington, D.C. They don't like to cover it on all the news shows, but nevertheless, thousands and thousands of young people going out joyfully in the cold. I mean, it wasn't that cold this year, but some years it's freezing cold. And so many thousands. And you just look at their banners and their faces. In fact, it's expanded because I know the Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., they have a kind of big youth rally gathering in the morning before they go out. And they had to find another location this year. So that they had the biggest place in Washington and then the next biggest place as well. Yeah. And so this is not something that's dwindling. And so I kind of wonder myself whether the generation of decline has, it's kind of reached a bottom and it's on the way back up again. And not so much, it's interesting to hear about vocations. You have more vocations. But I think the typical image of a Catholic church, or a church, let's say, full of old ladies, that's not really what Catholic churches in America look like at all. Not at all. They have vibrant children's ministries, all kinds of programs that engage the family. In England, where I come from, the churches are much more, especially the Anglican churches, congregations of old ladies, but not here today.
Jill, what are you finding from where you sit?
I don't know that the data that's being done by sociologists of religion, either in the United States and even globally, supports that religion is on the rise among the youth. In fact, I've seen no data that suggests that. I've seen the data that suggests the opposit.
But you do know the Dr. Christian Smith study, right, of youth and religion?
I've read some of that. Yeah.
Because what he did very extensive interviews with young people that believe, don't believe, say they're against it. And he found a very, very high proportion. The overwhelming majority will say they do believe in God and they think religion is a good thing and all that kind of stuff. They might not attend church.
Well, there's a huge disconnect between who believes in God and whether you participate in church. Those are two completely different questions.
And I'm trying to separate that. We're talking about people going and filling the pews.
Completely different
whether there's a spirituality that people are turning toward during difficult times, that's something.
Oh, yeah. I think what you see, and it's certainly clear that those youth in the younger demographics, and for study purposes, we're talking about people that are 25 and younger, those who are religious are quite fervent and quite excited, quite energized, will show up at these rallies and really be out there engaging themselves and being faith-filled people in the public square and in their own private lives. I think what the trend lines are showing is that we do have a younger demographic of people who are lukewarm about the institutional, traditional manifestations of religion and who are perhaps still eager or even open to some other alternative forms, what often is called parachurch kind of organizations, where they're not going to come to church, they're not going to do the traditional thing, but they might be involved in a small group that's concerned about helping hungry people or helping the homeless or taking in kids that are at risk or doing some other thing from a faith-filled perspective. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that speaks to a younger demographic more than a traditional type of liturgy or ritual or tradition or institutional format. So it could be that many of the churches and other religious bodies have to really engage that question and say, not so much how do we compromise, we're not going to compromise who we are, but can we rethink how we present who we are and how we deliver what we have to deliver so that a younger demographic can see it and be excited about it.
Well, I feel I've got to go back to Pope John Paul II because I mentioned earlier the World Youth Day Denver, which was 20, 30 years ago, whenever it was. The next one will be in Brazil, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and they've just been in Spain last year, even with this Pope, who isn't quite as youth-friendly perhaps as JP2 was. And it all started off with John Paul in Poland many years ago saying, I want to meet some young people. I want to engage some young people. Before you know it, you've got 1 million, 1.5 million young people from all over the world. And so they want to engage. So I think what you said is exactly right. Perhaps the traditional image of just people in the pews, nodding and bowing and so on, is not so appealing. But the church is reaching out with different ways to engage a younger generation, whether it be the 25s or unders or even the 45s and unders, really. The church is interested in that. The church, it's not an accident that the church has survived 2,000 years.
That's right. They've
always had to work at it to some degry.
I want to go back to a few questions about the ordinariate because we have you here, and that's something new that's just happened. If I understand it, if a priest wants to bring his, and I keep saying flock, but his congregation over, that this new setup is to make it easier that they can all come to you very easily, or easier.
As a group.
As a group.
As a group. But we'd want to very quickly qualify that by saying we don't want them to take what properly belongs to their denominational family. We've had to be very clear about this, that because of all this turmoil going on in the Episcopal Church, for instance, the buildings belong to the Episcopal Church, and they don't belong to the local congregation. And so for a congregation and a priest to come to the Catholic Church in this way, it means sacrifice, because it means they're going to have to leave those physical structures behind in making this transition.
Another question. They can come, a priest can be married, you're married, can come to you. If you are a woman who has been ordained and you want to bring your flock, she can't come, can she? In that way.
In that way, she can't. I met 2 former women clergy priests in the Episcopal Church who are now Catholics now. And they're very active. One of them...
But they are no longer priests.
They're no longer priests, but they're active in ministry. in catechesis, and well, at least that's the one I'm thinking of. But it's very rare. You won't see that very often, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So what is your ultimate hope for this whole new movement, for this new position of yours? I mean, it is brand new for you.
It's brand new, yeah. Oh, I think I would want to be able to gather together and lead people that are genuinely happy and joyful about being Catholic, and understand that they're joining a very big family, and get to know their brothers and sisters, and experience the joy of the faith. Because for a lot of them, they've been in situations that have been so conflicted that they have lost the joy of being a Christian. And so for them to have that back, and to gain a self-confidence in their faith again, and to be able to share it with others, those are goals that I would have.
And I think, you know what I realized, we have buried the lead in this whole story, is that this is happening right here in Houston.
Right here
the
in
Ordinary
Houston.
is right here.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming in and joining
God
us.
bless. Thank you very much.
Now, each week we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org/Houston8. There you can read about the topic, learn more about the guests, and even watch past episodes. Next week on Houston 8, a look inside the world of Rodeo Houston, the sports, the entertainment, the education, and the money. That's next Friday night at 8 p.m. right here on Channel 8. And that does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.